Locked in our chests is a pump that must never fail. With each familiar thud, it delivers a regular supply of blood to fuel the body's needs. What's more, this supply is varied to match the changing demands of the tissues. How exactly is this fine-tuning of supply to demand brought about? And what can simple measurements like heart rate and blood pressure tell us about the workings of this restless pump? It's during exercise that some of the most obvious changes in blood flow occur. When we're at rest, our total blood supply is about equally distributed among the major organs of the body. During exercise, this distribution alters dramatically. Blood flow to most organs drops to less than 5% of the total output, while about 80% is shunted to the muscles of the legs. At the same time, however, the amount of blood pumped out by the heart each minute rises from about 5 litres to 25, so that blood supply to vital organs like the brain can be preserved. How exactly does the output of the heart increase to meet these demands? This requires a closer look at our flexible pump during its rhythmic cycle of contraction and relaxation. Every second, blood from the two smaller chambers, called auricles, surges into the larger ventricles. This happens during the relaxed or diastolic phase of the cycle. In the contraction or systolic phase, the ventricles force blood into the rest of the body. The total output of the heart will depend on two things: the amount of blood that's pumped out during each stroke and the rate of beating. So blood supply is increased by a greater stroke volume or a faster heart rate. Changes in heart rate are probably the most familiar to us. During vigorous exercise, our heart rate might increase from a normal 70 beats a minute to well over 100. Certain types of physical training can improve the amount of activity that's performed at a given heart rate. This is because the heart, like any other muscle, can be developed with exercise. The throb of the aerobics class strengthens the heart by training it to pump with more power and efficiency. In aerobic exercise, the muscles demand more oxygen, and both heart and circulatory system must work extra hard to meet these requirements. Fit people have lower resting heart rates than average, perhaps as low as 40 or 50 beats a minute. This is because their well-developed heart muscles can pump out more blood per beat. This is clearly more efficient than simply increasing the heart rate to the point where the heart itself no longer has time to fill properly with blood. But it's not just vigorous physical exercise that produces dramatic changes in blood flow. These planes appear to be defying the force of gravity, but during the course of their turns and dives, their pilots will be exposed to physical forces that give an apparent increase in gravitational force. We can measure these forces of acceleration as multiples of 1g, the acceleration due to gravity. A pilot could experience up to 10g, that is, 10 times his own body weight. During a particular turn or dive, these g-forces may last from a couple of seconds to about a minute. The result is a dramatic change in blood flow with important physiological consequences. At the Royal Air Force Institute of Aviation Medicine in Farnborough, high G-forces can be simulated without a pilot ever taking off. Sergeant John Bass is preparing for a test flight that will take place entirely indoors. He'll be monitored by a research physiologist at the Institute, Squadron Leader Ian Mackenzie. A semicircular light bar is placed in front of John to monitor his field of vision during the run. The flight cabin isn't part of a conventional aeroplane. It lies at the end of a centrifuge arm about 10 meters long that can be spun to give forces up to 30 G. In this particular test, John will be exposed to a G-force that's 4 times his normal body weight.
Control room, this will be a 4G run, 1 G per second onset rate.
15-second plateau. John, if you can confirm you're ready for a 4G run?
Yes, I'm ready.
We're ready for our 4G run.
Prepare. Stand by.
Stand by.
As the centrifuge picks up speed, some obvious physical changes take place. John seems to age temporarily since his face muscles begin to sag. But there are equally dramatic changes to his physiology. By adjusting the arc of lights in front of him, John can indicate the edges of his field of vision. As the lights track inwards, he's indicating the onset of tunnel vision, called grey out. What lies behind this loss of vision? After the run, Ian Mackenzie pointed out the reasons to Dave Robinson from the Open University.
Now, is this the point where he begins to lose vision?
Yes, it is. As the G level has increased, the blood pressure of the eye level has reduced and blood flow to the eye has reduced, more especially at the edge of the eyeball, so that the subject loses peripheral vision first, known as tunnelling, and later on he'll start to lose central vision. As we increase the G level, the subject would have lost more vision until he had no vision at all, known as a blackout. And then if we increase the G even more, blood supply to the brain would fail, and the subject would lose consciousness. We call this a G-induced loss of consciousness, or G-lock for short. But I've got a video of an experiment which I took part in, where that effect is demonstrated. Here's the start of the run, and you can see about 10 seconds into the run, the G level between 5 and 6G come out like a light.
That looks pretty grim, Ian. Does it feel as bad as it looks?
Well, not really. It's not that unpleasant a sensation, actually. But the important thing to notice is that it takes between 10 and 15 seconds for me to recover from that.
But 15 seconds is a long time when piloting an aircraft. Surveys show that accidents have occurred as a result of G-induced loss of consciousness. The problem may be even more serious than this, since people who've suffered G-lock don't necessarily remember the incident. But what sorts of G levels are we likely to meet in everyday life?
If you take your car, for instance, then when you're turning around a sharp corner, you're going to experience a lateral or sideways acceleration, but that would never be more than 1G, in addition to the normal vertical 1G force that you experience. At a fairground, for instance on a roller coaster, you might experience G levels as much as 2G for a short period of time. You can experience much higher G levels if you were to crash your car, when you might see G levels as much as 30G or even more. But you experience those for a very short period of time, fractions of a second, so that your tolerance to those G levels is determined mostly by the mechanical strength of your body. On the other hand, with our fighter pilots, they're seeing excess G levels for periods of seconds to a minute or so. And in that time, you can have significant movements of bodily fluids, and your tolerance is determined mostly by the cardiovascular system and the heart.
Ian and his colleagues are monitoring heart rate and blood pressure continuously using a finger cuff method to explore what's happening to blood flow during a centrifuge run. The method is indirect, but it can give readings comparable to those obtained by direct pressure measurements from the arteries. So, how does the system actually work?
It's a simple system whereby we've got a cuff around your finger which is sensitive to blood pressure, and the results of that are displayed on the screen of this machine here. There are two values. The maximum value of pressure in the cardiac cycle is known as systolic and is displayed here. The minimum value in the cardiac cycle is known as diastolic blood pressure, and that's displayed here. The pressure averaged over any one cardiac cycle is known as the mean blood pressure, and that's displayed here.
Does it matter where I put my hand?
While you're lying down like this, no it doesn't. We can demonstrate that. If we look at the blood pressure with your hand in this position, it's between 90 and 100 millimeters of mercury. If we now place your hand over your heart, the value is still around about 90 millimeters of mercury. And again, if we place your hand up here, still at the same level, but behind your head, we're still getting readings of between 90 and 100 millimeters.
When Dave's lying down, all the blood vessels are at the same level as the heart, so the blood pressure is essentially uniform throughout the body. When he stands up, it's a different matter. The heart must now pump blood round the body in the face of a constant pull of gravity. The change in blood pressure at any level of the body will now be a product of three factors: the density of the blood, the gravitational force, and the difference in height between the heart and the part of the body we're looking at. For regions below the heart, blood flow will be assisted by the pull of gravity. So the blood pressure, say at waist level, will be higher than that at heart level. But for organs above the heart, such as the eyes, the heart has to pump blood against the force of gravity. So the blood pressure at eye level will fall by an amount related to the difference in height between the heart and the eyes. For Dave, this distance is around 30 centimetres. This gives a drop in blood pressure of about 25 millimeters of mercury compared to the heart. And the mean blood pressure at eye level is about 75 millimeters of mercury. So the gradient of blood pressure running along Dave's body is due to the effect of gravity tending to pull blood into his legs. How does this relate to a pilot seated in the centrifuge? When the centrifuge spins, the gondola swings out. The pilot's body becomes tilted so that his head lies towards the center of the centrifuge with his legs pointing outwards. A centrifugal force of acceleration acts along the pilot's body, which is some multiple of the normal force of gravity. So we get a gradient of blood pressure along the line of the body, just as we do at 1G, but the gradient will be much steeper, by an amount depending on the size of the G-force applied.
Stand by.
We can actually test this by repeating the experiment. The centrifuge is run for the same time span and G value as before. What blood pressure changes are found at eye level? At the start of the run, the value is about 80 millimeters of mercury. But during the run, it falls to about 0, and John experiences a tunneling of vision. At this point, he can no longer maintain a full flow of oxygen to the eyes. How can we relate this to changes at the level of the pump itself, the heart? The run can be repeated to measure blood pressure changes at heart level. As G increases, there's an immediate fall in blood pressure. This is because the centrifugal force tends to push blood away from John's head towards his legs. This pooling of blood reduces the amount returning to the heart, so blood pressure at heart level falls. But about 10 seconds into the run, blood pressure at heart level gradually increases, and there's an increase in heart rate. What causes these changes? Special cells called baroreceptors are found in the carotid artery of the neck, the major vessel leading to the brain. These are sensitive to any fall in blood pressure and initiate a reflex response to restore the balance. Blood vessels in the legs constrict and assist blood flow back to the heart. The increase in heart rate raises the total output from the heart to organs like the brain. The overall effect is to counteract the centrifugal force and redirect blood flow to those organs where the blood is in short supply. But to what extent can the reflex response compensate at high G?
The baroreflex never ever entirely overcomes the decrease in blood pressure from the acceleration. But there's a lot that John can do to help himself, even without the use of special equipment. The best way to demonstrate this is to get John to do another run on the centrifuge at a higher G level, this time using a special manoeuvre that we know as the anti-G straining manoeuvre.
This manoeuvre involves a particular pattern of breathing, a quick breath in and then a prolonged strain. In this way, the blood pressure at heart level can be raised in bursts, increasing the blood flow to the eyes and the brain. So, John can withstand higher forces of G without blacking out or losing consciousness. But such drastic forces aren't needed to get our blood going.
You vicious bastard! Come on! Oh my God! I'm warning you, if you don't start, I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3, right! That's it! You've tried it on just once too often! Right! Well, don't say I haven't warned you! I've laid it on the line to you time and time again! Right.
The life of a London motorist places its own pressures on the heart, as Dr. Malcolm Carruthers showed on a rather unusual car drive.
So, Malcolm, you've got me all wired up with electrodes. What are you going to measure?
We're measuring two things simultaneously. Firstly, we're measuring your pulse rate, which we're taking from the electrodes on the steering wheel, and that's giving a direct readout. And the blood pressure we're measuring by a novel device called a pulse time blood pressure monitor. It picks up the electrical signal of the contraction of the heart off these two electrodes on your chest, and then it measures the arrival of the pulse at the fingertip, times the interval between the two, and that is inversely related to your blood pressure.
And what sort of resting levels are you getting from me at the moment?
Well, we're getting about 132 systolic, the upper end of the blood pressure range, over about 70 diastolic, the lower end of the blood pressure, and your heart rate's ticking over at a steady 70 to 80 beats a minute. So you're quite calm and collected now.
Well, now we've got some resting levels. Should we go out into the London traffic and see what that does to my blood pressure and my heart rate?
Right, let's boldly go there. So we're here on the A4, and to make life a bit easier, can keep over towards the middle or even the outside lane. Yes, the blood pressure is going up to 160 in this occasion. It's not heavy traffic, but we keep right on boldly till we come to the North Circular. Right, so you have to keep in on the left here, otherwise you find yourself shooting up onto the M4, which shouldn't happen to anybody.
No, I don't really want to get siphoned off up there.
Slight uncertainty there seems to have sent your pulse rate up over 100. It's Beginning to get really jammed up now. We're heading towards the rush hour.
There's people wandering across.
Right, foot hard down now.
Well, I presume my heart rate went up as we went round that slip road there.
Yes, it did, certainly to over 100, and your blood pressure went up too, from about 135 up to 155, just touching 160.
And are we going down again now?
Yes.
With this relatively straight piece of driving.
Pulse rate seems to come down before the blood pressure.
All right, the wheelchair crossing the road.
Yes, we had a brief flash of 185 there on the blood pressure side. Pulse rate around the 100 mark.
Still well above normal.
Yes.
Well, Malcolm, how did I respond to driving in London traffic?
Well, it certainly seemed to turn you on. You showed most of the signs of a stressed London driver. Your pulse rate went to over 100 beats a minute, and your blood pressure went up to over 160 systolic, the upper end of the range. Really, I think you were showing this mixture of adrenaline and noradrenaline stress hormone release. Adrenaline more related to anxiety, and noradrenaline more related to anger and frustration. The adrenaline causes the pulse rate to go up, and the noradrenaline causes constriction of the arteries and the arterioles, and that pushes your blood pressure up.
And of course, what's interesting is that I wasn't actually doing any physical exercise at all whilst I was driving.
I think it shows how our Stone Age physiology and biochemistry has become inappropriate to our modern space age setting. So there you are, all fueled up and nowhere to go, and so you don't offset the products of this fight, flight, alarm reaction by physical activity, by actually fighting a saber-toothed tiger.
So the emotional stress of battling in traffic may produce effects on the heart that mimic those of physical activity. Can this continuous monitoring of heart function reveal both normal variations and abnormal patterns?
Blood pressure has been the sort of missing physiological variable for far too long. And now, by looking at everyday and not so everyday situations, and we've looked at racing drivers, people appearing on television, and parachute jumpers, we can begin to see how physiological responses can play a part in high blood pressure and heart disease, among many other stress-related disorders.
Cameras on.